Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Bass Shed Podcast. My name's Ryan Roberts. All right, this is the second part of the conversation with Jonathan Herrera. And for context, the story you're going to hear him start off with here happened at the 10th anniversary party for Lakeland Basses. He's got a little encounter with Duck Dunn that I thought was hilarious. There's another little kind of nugget towards the end of the conversation that's been on my mind since we've talked about this and since I've had this conversation with Jonathan, which we talk about career care. We talk about self-care. We also talk about caring for your career and still nurturing the artist thing while we're all just working as musicians as well. But the artist needs to be nurtured. And the creative spirit and all that stuff, whether you're writing music or band leading or whatever that means for the individual. We touch on some of those things, and that idea has been rattling around in my head since this conversation, and it will show up on other podcasts, actually, because I've been mulling that over a lot in my mind. So here's the second half of the conversation with Jonathan Herrera, and I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. I remember I was getting Duck Dunn. We were all in a van, like coming from the hotel or something, and Duck was getting back in the van, and he was getting along in years and maybe not in the best shape, and he kind of stumbled on his way, stepping into this van, and he kind of fell back, and I was right behind him, and just as a reflex to prevent him from falling, I put up my hands and I grabbed his ass, like both cheeks, with both of my hands. And so I'm like one of the few people that's gotten to feel up.
All right, well that part's staying in. Yeah. Let's pick up the story. So
So I'm at the magazine.
Yeah,
I'm meeting cool people.
Uh-huh.
Carl, I was talking about Carl, and I guess it was the context of, like, you were asking if it was a like a 9-to-5 kind of Monday through Friday job or not. And at the time, it very much was. And Carl was a part of that, in that it was very much trying. We really felt like, even though it was a magazine about bass, we definitely wanted it to be as kind of rigorous and professional as any, like, serious magazine.
Sure.
And Carl was a big part of that. So yeah, it functioned, just like any other magazine would, and yeah, the beginning time there was really me just trying to get up to speed. And I remember pretty soon after getting hired, going to my first NAMM show and being walked around as this new, the guy at bass player, which again at the time was an important place for
sure. That's like
the industry. That I was going to be the gatekeeper, and I can't tell you how fraudulent I felt as a 23-year-old, I think at the time, like meeting, Mike Tobias or
right.
someone in that.
How did
space.
having that kind of place within the bass community, what did that do for your work outside of the magazine? Were you picking up more gigs because the cat saw that you're, young and doing stuff on a bigger level than just local gigs? Did you accrue work because of your presence at the magazine?
I don't know that I did, really. This could partly just be my personality. I don't know that I was ever really made an effort to, in a kind of explicit way, parlay it or leverage it. I think there were people that worked with me that might not have even really known that
back in the days where your whole life wasn't on the internet.
It wasn't exposed to everybody. Exactly. I didn't. There wasn't an obvious connection. Although there was a much more important and kind of abstract connection, which was I was super immersed and saturated in bass and in trying to discover and elicit, what are the best practices and who are the best people at this craft. Sure. And writing stories about them, editing and reading all of the content that was going through the magazine each month. And like that was an incredible amount of benefit to me, just to have that kind of constant exposure.
Yeah.
So I think that obviously benefited my playing and my appreciation for what the skill set, you know, would really need to be in order to do this thing. I mean, I think rather than sort of trying to glean that on the periphery, I was like in the middle of it all. And I was also going to NAMM and other events and meeting all of the practitioners and people in the industry and the people making the instruments and designing the amps and all the players that are associated with all of that, and just steeping myself in it. And so I was definitely learning a lot from that, and hopefully bringing that to my personal private musical life, you know.
How did being around during that, I think it's fascinating being that age, 23, at that period.
Yeah.
So we're talking, what year are we in? 2002?
2003.
Okay.
Yeah, 2-3.
So this is still 2003. Let me try to remember 2003. We're dealing with Wooten, Michael Manring. I think Basic Streams, or the Basic Streams cookbook record just came out with Wooten and Steve Bailey. Seems like it had been out. Like really a lot of soloistic bass things were at the forefront. It
was really the birth of that thing.
That whole culture. Right. And so being a 23-year-old, you're seeing the magazine is obviously still referencing the legends who have passed, who are just sidemen at the best degree possible. But then you have these solo guys. How was this conflicting information to a 23-year-old bass player for you to be that immersed in it, to be like, well, they're getting recognition and that's great, but then they're getting a lot of recognition and that's great. How do I put this together for my own artistry and my own voice on the instrument?
Yeah, I think it was probably something that, you know, most people go through. I mean, obviously in life in general, and then, you know, in your music is, who am I going to be? You know, you spend this period, if you're really getting serious about it, really emulating and studying the people that resonate with you, and just trying to be the best copy of whomever that might be. Yeah. And, you know, just as you start to become your own person in life, you start to become your own musician. And I do think that I felt perhaps more confusion about who that would be because of this exposure I was having to like the cutting edge of bass. And but I think I began. I mean, one of the constant, you know, tenets that would just the thread through lines that would emerge from all of these interviews and stuff we were doing was this idea that a bass player is supportive. It was a lot about the traditional role of bass. I mean, even the guys like Victor, whoever, you know, if you ask them about what it means to be a bass player, they're not going to talk about like double thumbing. No. They're going to talk about, you know, doing the job.
They still get it.
And
I mean, they
still get it. They can still do it. You know, I mean, I remember early on, Stu Ham is a guy that at the time was up here, and realizing, you know, oh, he's just like another guy in town doing casuals, and like, you know, he's not existing in some crazy rich ivory tower.
Right. There's no bass player castle he gets to reside in.
Right. Exactly. Right. Very not quite the opposite. So I was also forming a more mature vision of how one, you know, gets work as a bass player. And I realized that, you know, both because it wasn't about solo bass, and also just personally, like I wasn't, that's not my thing. I'm not cut out for developing a huge solo repertoire. Like I think I just began to, over time, to kind of formulate a who I wanted to be. And I was also early on, I studied, and probably in terms of like gigs that were happening outside the magazine, I when I got here, I was still sort of in this, like, I had all this energy around learning and really wanting to be sort of guided and mentored through that process. And I was trying to figure out, okay, who's like the cat up here that I should call. And Kai Eckhardt kept coming up. Do you know Kai? You know of Kai?
I know of Kai, and he's been his name has been popping up on a couple episodes. And he's a guy that I've known of, you know, but I don't know if I've really spent enough time with or gone down the rabbit hole with to really check him out. But he's been an influence on a lot of people that I've been talking to.
Interesting. Yeah, he's like tremendous bass player, and I was aware of him going into realizing he was up here because I remember at school that record. There was a John McLaughlin trio record.
Okay.
With him, if you're gonna check him out, that'd be a good place to start. It's him, John, and Trilak Gertu.
Oh wow! Okay.
That I remember loving in school, and so I was kind of aware of him. And then like realizing, oh wait, he's up here. He lives in Berkeley. So I called him, and he started teaching me. I go to his studio in Oakland, and I think it was, and I know this now because I do teach also. Like that there is a certain, now that I see it from this side, like feeling you get when you have a student that's actually really invested in it, which is not always the case.
That's
and I think
rare. That's incredibly rare, actually.
Yeah, it's super rare, and I think that became evident to him early. That I could play, and I was really thirsty to learn more. And he is really innovative and thoughtful. Puts a lot of effort into how he teaches and kind of develops a more strategic approach to it than I think maybe a lot of teachers who are just trying to make that extra money. And I think he was really largely influenced by the Indian classical tradition.
Okay.
Partly I think because of his early work with Trilak, and then he did some stuff with Zakir Hussain, the master tabla player. And there's a guy up here, a horn player named George Brooks, who also is kind of really influenced by Indian music. And so Kai, so partly it's just like in terms of the framework for lessons, there is a certain, I don't know a lot about it, so I don't want to talk out of turn, but there's a cultural tradition, Indian classical, of this kind of that has a lot of structure to it about like the sort of pace of things, and that there's this period at the end of it where you're sort of in a room for 40 days and 40 nights only practicing, and they pass food through a slot in the door kind of thing, and you go to the bathroom in a bucket. So
it's solitary.
So it's solitary and but there's like
confinement.
But you're exactly. But there's this real mentor-student kind of thing that has like millennia of sort of to solidify, and that plus then practically in terms of the music, there was a lot of investigation of rhythm from the angle of Indian classical music. So I was introduced to Konakal, which is the Indian syllabic rhythmic system, which. I don't know if you familiar with that. Have you heard that done?
No.
Like, it'd be like tuck, like tuck, 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 that kind of thing.
I mean, that sounds like how dudes count off odd meters sometimes.
Right, and it's a really good. That's exactly what it's so beneficial for. It's such a better way to say and think of rhythm than the Western system, which is 1 E and 2 E.
So what does it do? Just it only acknowledges accents and not necessarily the order of accents.
It sort of uses. Wait, hold on one sec. Sorry. It's sort of. Hold on. Sorry. I'm doing this thing. Sorry. It uses. Sorry, someone just walked in. I say all of this with the caveat that I'm no expert, but essentially it uses these rhythmic units. So let's say for 2, there would be taki.
Right.
Instead of 1, 2, taki. For 3, there'd be taki ta. For 4, taki di mi. For 5, dariki na dom.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can group these together and create rhythms that are accented in whatever way the subdivisions you choose are. So, and that can occur at any within any, if you want to associate it to Western music, like within any meter. So the 4 taki di mi could be 4 quarter notes. It could be like ta ki di mi, or it could be taka di mi, taka di mi, taka di, or 16ths. So what emerges when you kind of get into it is you have this ability to say and think of rhythms that you just couldn't accommodate in the West. Like, so a 7 could be like takadimi takada takadimi takada takadimi takada. That'd be a 4-3-7, or you just switch the 3 to be takada takadimi takada takada. So it's got this incredible flexibility to place accents in things that in places that you just
in almost
accommodate.
like a more natural way too. So like if we go back to the idea of how to break up 7, I forgot the grouping within that structure for 5, but I mean it's not unnatural to group 7 as 5 and 2 now, which is like
exactly
never happens if someone's going to call a tune in 7 or drops you a chart in 7. First thing you look at it,
you just couldn't
look. Is it 3/4 or 4/3? And typically it's 4/3.
Yeah, in larger subdivisions of like duple meters in odd ways become possible. Like there's this tune that I played with this band later on, which I can get into, which was like a 7, like 7-7-5-5 in 6. So it's like in 6/4. If you count how many 16th notes
the groupings is 7-7.
24. But within 6/4, if you think of 16th notes, you could do 7-7-5-5. So it would be like, there would be no way to even conceive if someone like handed you like, all right, do this. You'd be like, how do I think of this? And with Konakol, it's like really easy. If it was like 1, 2, it'd be like takadimi takata takadimi takata 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 takadimi takata takadimi. So I just did this really seemingly difficult thing fairly organically using that language. So yeah, he exposed me to that, which was a huge asset. Because I was starting to. You get odd things come up, and you're like, "How do I do that?" It's not going to work. Going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sure, or even like like I played with this vibes player years ago, and he's a vibes player in New York, and he writes really challenging music, and it was a lot of mixed meter, and this was kind of my first exposure to mixed meter. That was all these compound irregular meters. And it was, I remember like getting the PDF a few days before the gig, just like, man, there's not enough time, to shed this before the gig. If the gig was 3 years from now, I might be cool, but having this together by Saturday isn't going to be an option. Anyway, I go to the rehearsal, do the thing, but after that, then I got I spend as much time on it as I can in my personal time. Obviously, there's maintenance practice, there's working world practice, I got to learn tunes, whatever, but I spend as much time on odd meter as possible. I'm still like, there's still a long way to go there because I get sidetracked myself, but this seems like a really organic way to think about it. When I'm trying to, if I'm trying to create a polyrhythmic thing while soloing in 7, which seems dumb, and why waste my time? And yes, I agree with all that. But it's then I don't have to think about this and like, all right, well, it's the accent on 6, then it's the accent on 5, then it's the accent on...
Totally.
It can kind of just fall more organically. And now
Yeah, you feel a pulse. Yeah. You feel like a clave,
right. Right, great association.
Yeah. That's something that that idea of like a clave is something. I did a gig with Sean Rickman, who great drummer, who among other things played a bunch with Steve Coleman and the Five Elements, and that music is like extremely filled with all kinds of crazy metric trickery.
Right, and I want to say I went to a master class. Did Steve Coleman have a vocalist play in the group?
He I think sometimes there would be a vocalist.
So then it was the vocalist that was doing some gigs. It was her and Mark Drescher, the bass player. We're doing this master class at the Whale years ago. She was explaining like her. It's almost that approach to rhythm, but how she would break up intervals. And it was this kind of like this pitch class, really serial approach to improvising. Yeah, cool. It was really fascinating. And initially, someone could think, even with hearing you do that and sing those rhythms, okay, well, that's a lot to think about.
I I can vouch for it. It actually it's very organic. I mean, again, it's the product of thousands of years
Sure.
of like evolution in that system. And I, as far as I know, the syllables themselves are actually there to emulate the tone in a kind of abstract way of
Sure.
the drum of the tabla. So yeah, it just kind of rolls off the tongue in a way that
No, and it feels natural, and it's a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
But I remember taking a music class, when I was 20 or 21, and they were explaining serial music and the Matrix and all that, and someone in the class raised their hand and said, "How is that music? This just seems like math." And the professor who had his doctorate in composition, and the 20th century thing was that's his personal get down. Like, he loves the 20th century stuff. He looks right at the student. He's like, "How is 5/1 music?" Like, it's the same algorithm.
Right,
this
right,
is just
right,
a
right.
different algorithm.
Yeah.
And
I
like,
there's-
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there's no one has the privilege to define what
No,
something
at
is.
all. Right.
Yeah. But I think that algorithmic sort of it's giving a human, it's making rhythm human in a way that it gives you an access point, like a window into because obviously rhythm in the West is by and large fairly vanilla, right? It's just our system. We it seems like we've invested our energy into harmony, but there's obviously it's capable of so much more. And it wasn't until I began to learn that that opened up to me in a way where I could free up in an odd meter, because what it does is it emphasizes that there's at the base of most odd things there's a pulse.
Sure.
And it's much you can wrap your head around the pulse. You don't need to count.
Right.
In fact, counting is counterproductive.
Yeah, that's going to lock it into parameters. What do you think that is with Western music? Do you think it's the nature of what dancing was in Western, European, like that, because the dancing was aristocratic, and there wasn't like a street dance that music was.
Well, there was. It just didn't make it. The history books.
Yeah.
There was always folk music, I think. Even during the Middle Ages, there was people at home were hitting stuff or doing things.
But the major,
it just wasn't commemorated.
I think the major composers being writing for, the gig was for the rich people.
Yeah, and also for
Yeah.
church, which was the same thing at the time. I think that's part of it. Was there's a natural conservative, origin
Right,
point.
and so rhythmically, it's not. It has to be very controlled and structured and polite.
And maybe there's this ideal this that just for all kinds of antecedents, there's this idealizing order and kind of perfection. And probably there was some religious undertones to that to do so is to sort of be nearer to God,
Sure.
and you think of, okay, if we can sort of put aside rhythm and we can sort of say, okay, this 4/4 and duple, like that there is something symmetrical and quote unquote perfect about that. Within that, then we can pursue. It kind of gets you off the hook as far as where we're going to put our time and energy. Like Bach was illuminating harmony in ways that had never been considered. But maybe what enabled that was like getting to put aside the rhythmic part to some degree as another place to innovate. Sure. I don't know. There's this kind of symmetry to it, which seems to suit the Western temperament and society and the Enlightenment and all of these ideas that we're stewing. Yeah. And that's kind of where we're all coming from in the West. That
right. I agree. But then you go to the cultures of India or Cuba or South American and Africa and all these other cultures that are kind of rhythm first. Now I have not done deep studies on like origins of culture within any of those cultures, but it seems like
a lot of it's Africa.
Yeah,
a lot of it's Africa and India.
There's just like this kind of chant thing that is happening, maybe on top of these rhythms, because there's it's this communal thing of dance and celebration, whether that's, and I know a lot of times there's a tie to their spiritual hierarchy, and it's a celebration, it's an offering, it's a whatever it might be, but there's a dance involved that's really part of their main voice to.
Right, it's like it's in the body and not in the mind. Somewhat, not to stereotype. I think also like there is something about the dominance of the Catholic Church through the music that lies at the base of like what we think of as like Western music and harmony comes from music that was made for the church. So then you look, okay, what was the theology of the church? And it was like very conservative and restrictive. I mean, famously, like the tritone was outlawed, and it's hard to imagine that being a fertile place to get. Whereas I think just these polytheistic religions in India and Africa, like it wasn't as ordered. It wasn't like that was an ideal to aspire to.
Sure, I mean, even if you look at the nature of that, monotheism versus polytheism, automatically it's opened up. The order and the structure is ordered up, so it's not just everything to one.
To pursue one thing.
That all has to be funneled in to please one idea. Everything's it's looser, it's more open, and everything has its place, so to speak, and works together as one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is. If there was, more time in a day, I'd like to think about that stuff more and like actually research that stuff.
The next podcast.
Yeah, right. The whole other release. So we're back to you at Bass Player Magazine. What are some highlights?
Yeah.
Well, you still work there. The magazine has changed names.
Yeah, the magazine is there is still a Bass Player Magazine. It's
the founding cats
own
a new magazine. Yeah.
Yes. So the Bass Player brand was purchased by a English publishing company, and they're still publishing it as Bass Player in the U.S. However, it was really just a rebranded version of their English magazine, Bass Guitar, which has been around for a while. So it has no connection to what we know and love as Bass Player. So the original Cats started their own thing, kind of spearheaded by this guy John Diaria, who was at Bass Player for the tail end there, called Bass Magazine, and that is much more like Bass Player was. I mean, it's actually even better in some ways because it's online. Thus, we're not limited, page wise, and you don't have to deal with all the distribution overhead. I mean, it's extremely expensive to print something and mail it out to a bunch of people. So
have however many copies dropped off at every local music store, and
it's a major undertaking.
I mean, in grocery stores, I remember going to grocery stores. You could buy Bass Player at Ralph, the equivalent of Ralph's back in Phoenix.
That's crazy. Yeah, those were the days. And that never got old when I was back in the going to a newsstand or a grocery store or whatever.
No,
seeing the thing I made, that was always like such a cool thing. But yeah, so now they have this thing online, which is really like in the spirit of the original magazine, which was just to really seriously look at this craft, and as far as highlights, I have so many. I mean, I in general, there's probably 3 categories of them. There's as technical editor, I was able to get my hands on like all the cool shit
before NAMM or just after.
Often before NAMM or I was really, especially because of the role at that time that Bass Player played in how a company would market their product or get it, create awareness. Like it would often an important facet of that was to have it covered in Bass Player. So I, in that sense, I had, perhaps not fairly, a lot of power. Which was always something I was really humbled by, especially having met a lot of these people. And the things I do and say is affecting their lives. This is their businesses. Sure. So that was a lot to take on, in my 20s.
Did a lot of people at the magazine respect that privilege?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of why we felt like our processes and just the way we ran the business had to be really rigorous and consistent, because I had some pretty big, what would qualify as scandals in terms of, maybe a negative review of a product or something. And you wanted to hedge against the possibility that if you were in a dispute with a reader or an advertiser or a manufacturer or an artist, that you could point to your process and your methodology as kind of
and you
ensuring that it was fair.
You did get the freedom to I don't know. Let's take a major amp brand, completely arbitrary.
Mm-hmm.
Just Ampeg. So if you're reviewing like whatever, like a Ampeg combo or something, and you're playing through it, and it's just you don't like their mid frequency little notches or whatever. You think they don't really hit anything, or there's not a big enough difference. Whatever your takeaway is, you don't like it.
Sure.
Do you have any obligation to, because Ampeg may or may not be running a big ad somewhere else in the magazine, do you have to take that into account, or can you really just fire from the hip and like, nope, this 115 B3 combo or whatever it is, this thing sucks. Like for the price, it's not worth it because of A, B, and C with tested this direction.
Yeah, so no, it was irrelevant. Formally, it was irrelevant whether or not the company advertised and
okay. So it was really
what their financial relationship.
You got to be complete.
There was a lot of effort made to insulate the editorial side from the advertising sales side of the business. I mean, I will say frankly, one of the hardest things about the job, especially as the pressures in the publishing industry began to kind of become more tangible, and the decline of print in the face of the internet, to maintain that line took more and more effort.
Sure.
Because, obviously, if, let's say, I piss off a company, and because I didn't like something they made, and then that causes them to not want to buy that cover for that back page ad, that costly ad, and that means that we're going to have a hard time staying in business.
Right.
Those kinds of pressures start to really become manifest. I would say that I left the full-time staff of the magazine at a moment where that was just beginning to happen, and I didn't like the way that felt, and not to say it did happen subsequently, it just became harder and harder. Plus, this so I can say with confidence that I never was going to say something in one way, but then thought, oh wait, they're advertising, I'm going to change this to I'm going to eliminate
sponsorship this. Never dictated what the readers would get. Okay.
No, but it, I can't account. I mean, I knew these people.
Right.
I met them. I had relationships with them. It's a part of what it means to be a journalist. I think you become close to your subjects just by virtue of being there, and that's always a hard thing to negotiate personally, is like, and I really tried. I really did. I can say with integrity that I really tried to maintain that, that the difference between my personal relationships to people and the professional relationship at the magazine. It was a hard thing. It's a hard thing to navigate. If there's a guy you're friends with, you've talked to him, you've hung out, you've gone out at NAMM to a bar, and then you get something that he's making, and it's like, this is my big thing, and you're like, don't like it. It's a tough thing to navigate all that. And I think eventually it just got so stressful, I had to not do it full time. But
was there ever any like, I'm kind of putting myself in that position here. Let's say, whatever. I get a Fender bass or something that I have to review, and I know the guy. Maybe Leo Fender for the sake of this not real story. Okay, hey Leo, dude, I don't like your bass. I'm gonna have to write about it, man. Like I think it. Like I'm letting you know up front. I have the problems with this bass, so I'm not. I wanted to give you the heads up as a friend that this is what's gonna happen. That was a part of the. That's gonna be released.
Yeah, that was actually not even like a personal thing. That was a part of the process. Again, because like we wanted the process to be sort of unimpeachable, because if something came up, we wanted to be able to point to the process as like a defense against it. But part of it was the opportunity for the manufacturer, builder, whatever, to fact check, which is essentially read the piece before it comes out. And so they would have a chance to argue. Why not argue with the conclusion, but if they found something flawed in the methodology, like how I reached that conclusion, they could do that, and that might impact. I might have to admit, you're right, that wasn't totally fair. They might point to. I mean, these people were very fastidious,
of course,
so they might point to some other thing I had written, like, well, you didn't mention that then. Why,
You're under the microscope just as much as the product is.
Oh my God, worse, because it's coming at me from every direction. Or in the cases where where they felt they wanted to do this and I wasn't going to change something, they would be able to write a response that we would print. So it'd be like, I didn't like the way this design of the headstock because it was hard to reach the tuner or whatever. They would then, in brackets, it'd be like, so-and-so responds. We believe that this placement allows the bass to balance better, and we think it's a reasonable, something like that. So there would be those chances to respond. And there would also be a lot of opportunity before the review for them to to contextualize the product for me. Because a big thing was me wanting to be sure that I was reviewing something fairly, which would mean reviewing it for what it was designed to do. Of course. So if I criticized this, let's say it's like a tube amp that's supposed to emulate a B15 or whatever, and then I am knocking it because it doesn't sizzle and it's not good for slap, or it doesn't, like that would be, it's like, no, it doesn't work for that, but we didn't want it to. That's not a fair criticism. So I would want to be sure ahead of time that I had all the information I needed going into something. But yeah, sometimes shit would happen that, that by far the probably the biggest controversy when I was there that I can recall off the top. I mean, there was a bunch of minor, monthly controversies and discussions, but I remember this. I don't know if they're still in business. AccuGroove. Yeah. They were, really well regarded, expensive, high end bass cabinets.
Am I thinking of the right company? Out in Redding, California, like just a little bit east of LA.
At the time, no. Carrie's out there. Nordstrand.
I know he's out there, but AccuGroove, just the cabinets. There's also
just the cabinets.
A company called Schroeder that I think is out there somewhere.
Oh, okay, cool. I didn't know that. I'm sort of not in that loop at the moment. At the time, they were actually up here. They were in the Bay Area.
Okay.
But they designed this thing that was it had a feature called the AccuSwitch, which was the ability to change the impedance of the cabinet with a switch. So that, I guess the idea being, if you wanted to bring 2 to a gig, you could switch it to 8 ohms, and then you could run both cabinets and not risk, loading the amp not enough. And so it was a cool feature, and it was something they marketed a lot as like some an innovative feature. And it was actually me and a guy I worked with at the time, Terry Budding, who's like a real expert into audio and audio engineering and stuff. We were looking at this like, okay, that's interesting. There's only so many ways that this could be accomplished. Just when it comes down to sort of the engineering side of things, there's only so many ways to do stuff. No one's going to like stumble on some thing that defies the laws of physics at this point. So and that was another big part of the job was really trying to understand the technology and teaching myself a lot about engineering. And but so we were kind of going into it with this awareness, and then when we got it, we realized that wait, those things aren't happening here. How are they doing this? Because we would expect to see a couple different things. Maybe a speaker that had 2 voice coils would be one way you could accomplish that. Or one that switches on and off, a dummy load, or there's various ways you could do that. None of which make a ton of sense, like why you would do that. But anyway, they were the ways you could.
Then you would need a cabinet that also had that. So both
exactly.
cabs.
It's on the speaker side.
Or
you could have one. Let's say you had one 8 ohm cab and you had one 8 ohm cab with the switch.
Right.
They allowed you to switch it to 4 ohms. for one gig, you want to just bring the one cab, so you bring the one that switches to 4 ohms because you can kind of maximize your output.
Sure.
But another gig, you want to bring both cabinets, so you switch that one back up to 8 ohms, and now you have 2 8 ohm cabinets, 4 ohm. I can see. I think it's a bit of a solution looking for a problem, but there are occasions where
I think that's a great way to describe it. But I mean, it could come in handy for maybe. I don't know. If it's on the speaker side, it's different. It's almost, I feel like it should be on the head side, so that for the guy who's on the road, and the cabs might be backlined. Yeah, when you don't know
the head is gonna just run as efficiently as the load on the head, being the cabinets, allow it to.
Right.
So like,
I don't know that much about this shit, so.
Yeah. The head is sort of, so long as you don't dip below the minimum, rating, the head should be fine. It doesn't really care.
Right, because that's just
it's
going to
more
put
like
out what it puts out until
what it
the
puts
resistance against it.
Okay. Exactly. So the higher the resistance, it's really impedance, which is resistance with a frequency component. The higher it is, the less efficiently your amp is able to run, meaning the less power it outputs. Right. So being able to switch that on the cab side, I can see some, whatever. There might be benefits there. But the long story short, the AccuSwitch didn't work. It didn't do what it was claimed to do. And that was something I felt like I had to say. And that, I mean, there's probably at the time was like a 90-page Talkbase thread on that fact. And
about your article or the switches
about my article and the article, and then what it said about the design and what it said about the company. I mean, all this stuff, which was one of those moments where it was really clear to me that the things I say are really matter to real people's lives. And I'm not really sure how AccuGroove recovered after that, as far as because there was just this disconnect between what it was they were saying and what had actually happened, and I was the person who made that public.
A little bit of a whistleblower.
Yes, and that was something I occasionally had to do, and was very stressful.
But I mean,
so I was.
I guess you're gonna. It's a double-edged sword, I would assume, because on the one hand, like, you might piss off people, but at the same time, but you're gonna also create this kind of a presence with integrity of like, all right, well, when we're reading Jonathan's articles, like, this is a fair, objective breakdown of what he's writing about. And so then there's, you're creating trust within the community about what you're writing about and an honest perspective on stuff.
That was definitely the goal.
Yeah, instead of just like, oh yeah, it's killing, go buy it. And then someone might, and then it sucks. Like, that's.
Yeah, I was always aware of the fact that, the people, again, this is a largely even more important kind of pre-internet dominance, that, people reading it are going to make real decisions and with their hard-earned money about the things I say, and I better do right by them. So that was kind of like a North Star, keeping that in mind. But yeah, it's very stressful. And when I was... on average, I was probably writing 2 or 3 product reviews a month for 9 years, something like that.
Oh, so there was more. It wasn't just like one article a month. You were doing multiple.
No, I was doing multiple, and I was also doing all kinds of ancillary things. Some really major gear-focused issues in which I would kind of be the primary content creator. A couple things which I'm really proud of. Like I did. Someone's gonna have to Google this, but I did this tube amp issue, which was a cover story, and it was like a multifaceted 20-page package of stuff, and I go sort of stage by stage through a tube amp and explain what every aspect does, and walk through all of the sort of side perspectives of, just massive stuff like that, which I like to think, at least at the time, added something to the lexicon of this thing.
Now, when
we were pursuing.
What was the I don't know. We spoke last week or something on the phone that you got to just pick the topics. yourself. Like nothing was
That-
prescribed. So were these personal investigations, or were you like a really big gear guy going into all this, or you just got curious? Like I don't know much about, this.
A lot of it was that. I mean, I would get to sort of pitch things, but at the time, and kind of the meat of my time there on the staff, it was still very much discussion. I mean, I wasn't in charge until the last couple of years there, so I wasn't. The freedom that I talked about with you the other day about to be able to pick was something that emerged later.
Okay.
Although. Yes, as I got more, experienced and I kind of earned the right to pick things, but they were largely. I mean, I've always been a person that's into technology and into, especially audio music technology, and I began to understand that if I trusted if I followed my own pursuits, and I could relay that thirst that I had for my own personal curiosity, and I developed, I think, a talent for conveying that in ways that would benefit a lot of people. That I could be a kind of a surrogate for the reader.
Sure.
So, for example, I had a personal interest, like, okay, tube amps, like, what's the deal, and what does a tube do, and how does it work? And like, I was just curious. I think I was fascinated by this little glass thing that got hot. Like, what's the deal? How does that work? And so I would leverage that curiosity, which would kind of drive me to really push and create something great. But then do it in a way that could help a lot of people, understand. And that was a constant thing. And I wrote so many pieces about especially about the technology and how things work and how pedals work and how does an envelope filter actually work and how does a distortion work and what are the different kinds, and here's a roundup of 20 of the different pedals, and how what happens if you kind of reverse engineer all that stuff. That was a constant churn there, and it was all driven by my own personal curiosity about these things. And I got to have this venue. I got paid to pursue that in a really, and I had the access to the people that design these things, and I could get them on the phone and they would take my call. Like that was always the thing that drove it. And
also kind of a nice setup for stocking your own personal studio at some point.
Well,
totally. you know exactly what you
perks.
want and exactly who to call for the product you're looking for.
Totally.
And
I mean, you asked earlier about how it benefits me,
Sure.
like the tone, like knowing how to get tones and who really made the cool stuff, and then getting bargains on it.
Bargains are great.
That was a major perk, and then throughout all of this, I was always like, okay, I can't only do gear. I mean, this especially after a couple years there, I was like, I can't.
Were you getting a little burnt out?
I was getting a little burnt out.
I mean,
I was like, all right.
At the end of the day, it's like,
the
oh,
new
great,
items.
another compressor. Yeah, it does the same thing. It compresses.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. So and you run out of how many ways can I describe like the buttery mids of something, so I was always kind of angling for more opportunity to do artist stuff. And so I perpetually through my career there, I did artist features. I could be selective about them, which was nice because it wasn't my primary like bailiwick, but wrote some cool stuff. Like I did, I think the first, I remember I did this Dave Holland story, cover story, that was really, I would do the people I really wanted to talk
Sure.
to, so I went and hung out with Dave Holland in L.A. and I went and
now where do you go? Like Ron Carter was in town last night in L.A. And not that I was going to go up to him and approach him about doing a podcast or anything, but of course it. Because I actually didn't end up going, but I was planning on doing that. But then I think to myself, like, so I start going through the scenario in my head, like, all right, well, what the hell am I going to say to Ron? Also, more importantly, what do I want to ask Ron that I feel like I haven't already read his answer to? I don't want to, not only, and this has nothing to do with me, I would want to learn more about Ron than I already know. And after having read enough and listened to him enough, what do I want to know about Ron that I don't already know? It would be a lot of the bass players that have made a name generations before I got in the game. like if I had the chance to sit down with Jocko or something, like, all right, I already know a ton about this dude. Like, what am I going to ask him?
Yeah.
And so going in and connecting with the dude who's been in the game a long time and has already released a lot of interviews and a lot of music, and there's a lot of coverage out there on the basic things that any bass player could talk to another bass player about. Where do you start with interviewing these guys?
I think there's a couple of ways. I mean, first, it's when you have the luxury of being able to choose to talk to people that you're independently, personally passionate about.
Sure.
That will help energize pursuit of like their truth, their vision, like that, because you actually honestly, whether podcast or not, or a magazine or not, want to know, need to know. And I
remember it was one of the first times I talked to Patitucci. Like, we had some really long phone conversations that were lovely, and we didn't talk about the bass at all, except for how do you juggle family. At the time I was married, how do you juggle family life and practice time? Like, how are you navigating that? And we would talk about things like that, or I asked him how he got the gig with Chick. Like, I already knew what his bases were. I knew his setup. I knew, I don't need to talk to him about gig. I know I had transcribed him enough to kind of know how he's approaching tunes and all that. And, okay, cool. Everything else is just somebody else putting in the hours to do those things musically. But who's the individual?
And I think that's the difference. Yeah, I think that's the difference between a kind of a hack and someone that really wants to derive benefit from and then share that benefit with the community at large. Like, it's easy to just do an interview by the numbers. Again, if you're talking to someone who's really successful, they've done that interview so many times, they go into a certain mode where the boilerplate comes out, and it's just, everybody's just checking a box. Okay, like, that coverage happened next, and there's nothing, lasting about that dialogue. And that's just not something that I'm interested in doing. I mean, for me, I really would spend a lot of time. We're talking about musicians here, so you have this opportunity to get to know them through their art, through their music. And in advance of talking to somebody, I would spend a ton of time saturating myself in that, trying to what is it I can learn about who they are in this way, and that would usually lead to all kinds of thoughts and things I wanted to understand. And it was rarely technical. It was rarely like, how did you approach that alter dominant?
Same way everybody else does.
It's just all the notes. So it was like it was something about their aesthetic or something about. Or if it was a project where they were taking on a new challenge, or for the first time they were doing arrangements, and you would want to know, okay, how did you come to that?
Right. What's the process?
The process that drove you to this place, and then a lot of it, and I think all interviews that are driven by personal curiosity are better, and a lot of it would be about tell me what. You've lived this life in music. You've clearly achieved some amount of success. Like, what can you point to in your development that you've carried with you that has helped you maintain that this career or this vision, and how do you weather all the slings and arrows? Like, those things are interesting to me because I want to figure out how to do that.
What would your answer be to that question? Actually, like. If that was your question to Dave, I was actually now, like, unless you're Dave Holland, your career has taken a different avenue than Dave Holland's, like, just across the board, right? So, but we all have these things, and maybe you've experienced it. I've been in LA for 13 years, and I've seen this kind of like changing of the guard happen, because like now there's these other dudes coming up from school, and they're the ones who are all hungry to get out on the scene, and they're the ones booking the gigs.
Yep.
And so, like, I'm kind of in the other side of that now.
Same.
So there's more time doing the thing, and we learn and take away and prune our own artistry. What would be your response to that question?
Well, couple things. I think this notion of trying to disentangle your identity from your musical life is one.
That's a big one.
I remember it's a concept I kind of was introduced to, I think in Effortless Mastery, Kenny Werner's book Effortless. Yeah, so there's something in there about
there's a couple of those. Have you read? There's one by Barry Green, The Art of Practicing. No, not The Art of Practicing. Inner Game of Music was his.
I think Barry Green. Yeah, I think no, I haven't read it. That sounds familiar. These kind of more holistic, philosophical perspectives on this life. But yeah, that always stuck with me. This that there's a kind of like if you are one of the musicians, like most of us, who chooses to not investigate this conflation of your identity and your music, you're living a high risk life, because music is intrinsically unstable as like a professional life.
Sure.
Like there will be moments of like, hopefully, of like incredible bliss. You're on the road, you're in Europe, you're playing at the, some villa. Like, it's just like you could not imagine a cooler life.
Sure.
And then, there's the 6 weeks where you don't have a single gig and you feel like everyone you know does.
Right.
And vice versa. And then there's this constant oscillation between those two realities. And so it's unstable. And if your sense of self-worth, your value as a person, is pegged to whether or not things are going well in music, you're going to spend half of your life extremely bummed out.
Right.
Because you feel great as a person, as a human being, when things are going well, and you feel horrible when they're not.
Sure.
And because the great times and the bad times are an inevitable consequence of life in music, you're kind of like signing up for a really kind of miserable.
Sure. No, and there's
ups and downs.
I mean, by nature, there's a toxic codependency there. I don't know if there's a non-toxic codependency, but there's definitely is a very toxic thing to be like, I need to be validated by being wanted to play somewhere. As a human,
exactly.
Like my whole, and I've definitely been on that side of it where I needed the validation as a musician to get the call.
Sure.
Because if you're not working, you're not desirable. If you're not desirable,
right, you're not anything.
Right, like what is it?
What are you doing with your life?
Right, but then
who do you think you are?
But fast forward, then there's been, there was a good year where I was working a lot of gigs, like 7 to 9 gigs a week regularly, and I was working a lot.
Yeah.
But then it's just like, all right, burnout, and just like the gigs don't really have any major artistic value to me. They're not doing anything for me. Like, I was staying busy, and that's cool. I was making a little money. That's fine, but it's other than that, and I think I almost needed to exhaust that codependency thing with the oversaturation to see what it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So, like working steadily is cool, but then like, well, there's gigs these nights of the week that I'm not getting called for. What the hell?
Right.
To then like doing them all and be like, I don't care anymore. I've done it. I'm over it.
Right. Yeah, I it's an ongoing process for me. I mean, I think I am not always successful in staying true to that principle, and I think it's amplified and made 1,000 million times harder by the existence of social media, which is this constant opportunity to compare yourself.
Yeah, and you're looking at everybody's highlight reel, and it's like
exactly
that doesn't mean,
and you're just like
that doesn't mean anything. Like I've heard,
you're not seeing the in betweens where they're just as miserable potentially, or just as frustrated.
Right.
So I think that as a thing that I I aspire to, and sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not, is a way to weather it. I also think this idea that music, it's easy especially if you've decided to be a professional, it's easy to get caught up in what that means in the social hierarchy and in professional and gear and all these ancillary things that whether or not you got this gig or that gig and should you go out tonight or not? And if you don't, what does that mean? You know, like all that shit is a constant, for me, is like a simmering source of anxiety. It's weirdly easy to forget. Like at the center of this is music.
Right.
This thing I really love that I used to have this very innocent attachment to, and just this uncomplicated.
Right, now it's turning into some like
thirst for
strategic war games or something where it's like,
exactly.
You know, if I march on Poland, are they going to ransack me? Like what? It's always this chess match of and it gets exhausting, and then you're putting all this,
and you can't win it.
Then you're putting
just
your
like
whole
a war,
career
you can't win.
In the nature of a bunch of people who are also in an unstable career.
Right, everybody's doing the same thing. Yet the illusion is that you're the only one doing it, and I think it's important to remember the music, and when the phone doesn't ring, like that's a chance to shed more, or that's a chance to listen more, or that's and again, not something I always live by, but something I aspire to is to, in times where I am troubled, remember how meaningful music is to me and how powerful it is, and to not be too put off by this. It's easy to start to weirdly, perversely, to negatively associate music because it's the thing that is the source of all of this conflict.
Yeah, I know. Separating the occupation from what it truly is, like
the act of music making or composing,
or just experiencing as a listener. Because I don't go out that often. I don't go out to check people out. Like, if I got a night off, like I want to stay in, and not go deal with traffic and people and all the other stuff. So I stay in. It's like but I still want to experience music, and so I listen. That's a big one for me. Or listen when I am driving. That's another place where I process music a lot. But experiencing it just for its sake. And then when you get to the gig, then it's all right. It's work until the tune happens. Then once the tune happens and I'm playing, it's not work anymore, and I get to just experience it. But it's this kind of, right now for me in my career, it's this back and forth, always kind of, almost like jump rope. Just constantly hopping into like this mindset. All right, cool. Well, now it's back to the job where, and the occupation is the worst. Like the occupation of being a musician is truly the worst. Although it's amazing that we do get to do what we love, and we're in the small percentage of people within the world that get to do that.
Comes at a cost.
It does. It's not everything it's, I think, viewed at from the outside.
No, it's a compromise. It's a series of sacrifices that you are obligated to make.
Right, at all times.
You want to.
Any pro musicians who are listening to this, they know the deal. We don't have to really go into them all because that's another hour of just all the pitfalls.
No one wants to listen. That's what you do every gig you go to. Bitch about
and go to a jam session if you want to hear musicians bitch.
Bitch.
Right, but the occupation is rough.
Yeah, I think
but at the end of the day, I can't not do it, and it all comes back to that. So you deal with it and you bitch about it, but it's like, oh, I can't not do this.
Right. The die is cast. That ship sailed.
Yeah,
I'm
in it, and we're going. So you're halfway up the mountain. You're halfway up Everest. You got to get to the top at this point, whatever that means.
And I think that's the thing is, it's like if you're on that journey and it's like you're already halfway up the mountain, like it's on you to figure out a way to make this work in such a way that you're able to be happy.
Sure.
You're able to feel good things. You're able to kind of get something out of life that feels satisfying, and that you put so much effort into your instrument, and you keep put effort into you're being a person who does this, and maintaining a positive, or at least a rational and sustainable attitude, because that's the thing I think that I've noticed starts to corrode people's sense of well-being. Is just they get so caught up in the grind, like they haven't put the work into like, how am I going to deal with this grind? What do I need to do? What's self-care mean for me?
Sure.
Like,
What's self-care, and
that
then
they're-
also what's kind of career care? Like what
Right.
to go play the gigs you're playing or teach at the places you're teaching, whatever thing that people are getting burnt out on. What's your outlet? What's your way out of this into something else? Because no one, I don't think, is created to do the same thing at the same place with the
Right.
same people.
So true.
You can't just stay there. Like, you will go insane. So there has to be not only one, because there's a nature of art that we all love. That's why we're here. It makes us feel something. There's a reaction. There's an emotional reaction. In addition to, so what's that creative outlet for everybody?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whether even if it's just going to, hear the local symphony during the symphony season, and like that's really what
Mm-hmm.
feeds you to build you back up because you're not into composing or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like do it.
Yeah.
Like follow through.
And that's
like,
career care, like just that, going and getting some new records. And then also
So true.
creating, it's kind of, I say that because it's a big part of what I'm doing now with the podcast and the website and everything. It's like creating another avenue so that all my eggs are not in that basket.
So true. I mean, I my life is very much a reflection of that
Cool.
attitude, both I think for my mental health and because there's a practical, like I have to.
Sure.
And you know how it is, like if you only at this point, having played as long as you have, only cared about and focused on getting better at bass, there comes a point where you know what's required to do that. You've been exposed to
Sure.
the data. It's what the variable is, like you and how much you're willing to put in and limitations of your body and your fingers, like those things, like that's all very known to you.
Mhm.
And for me, I don't know if you feel this way. It's like to stay engaged and to stay enthusiastic and inspired, I have to find new challenges.
Sure.
Within this umbrella.
Sure.
Or without it. Like I just have to stay stimulated.
Yeah.
And in like all things in arts and music, like often that means you have to come up with that on your own.
Yeah.
Like no one's gonna hand that opportunity to you.
And taking the
you have to-
vacation, I think, is necessary in the sense of from the instrument. Like just I've sometimes like not practicing and just absorbing new music or revisiting. I was doing this the other day. I was revisiting records that I used to love when I was like 20, 21. And that was kind of the listening for my day. It's like, all right, I'm pulling from the records I really remember loving at that time period of my life. And I want to see how I respond to them now. And I'm curious what my, what I think of all this. And stuff like that was fun. And I rediscovered some music that was really powerful that I remember liking, but I had a much more powerful response to this time around. And that was cool. It was fun to kind of check in with myself in my career like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
And how I listen to music differently, and what I remember loving about it now is like, is that still what I love about that? Or, it was actually a Ricky Skaggs record. I was looking.
Oh, dope.
Yeah, it's like, and that I really just loved the groove, and I like bluegrass music a lot.
Yeah, me too.
It's just got a pulse and a vibe, and I remember loving that about one song on the record. But it was like I heard all the nuance of his vocal phrasing this time and just started crying, and I was like, wow, interesting. Okay, I wasn't mature enough to grab that the last time. It's interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. That whole the way your ears evolve.
Yeah, and what I was ready for as a person, because there's been a lot of points in life, like records I've checked out, and then I will have gone through something major in life, and that song or the record means something completely different to me now because I wasn't ready for that record yet.
Right.
I couldn't handle what they were talking about, either instrumentally or lyrically or something.
Yeah, totally. And in order for the experience that, you have to just keep listening to music.
Yeah, and being honest with what you're listening to, I think there was
right.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of good friends that are really honest, grounded people here in L.A. that they'll drop these little nuggets of just talking, and there's something that
Mm.
there's always sticks out to me that helps me be okay with, not being a jazz Nazi just because I like jazz. Doesn't mean I have to know every Hank Mobley record ever.
Mm-hmm.
Or have to know, who produced whatever R&B record that I'm into. I don't have to.
Right.
I can experience
None
it
of,
all.
none of that matters.
No.
Yeah, and it's this constant process of realizing like it doesn't matter how you like you so long as you're finding satisfaction in the things you're doing, and you're learning how to actually have satisfaction. I mean, that's another thing is like when good things happen, learning how to actually feel what's good about them.
Yeah.
And not be looking around the corner for when they end or
right.
Like if you're able to come to, which I think a lot of that work has nothing to do with music, it has to do with just,
addressing abandonment issues.
Who we are
in
as
life,
people.
yeah.
And whatever those issues, we each have them. Like these things that this baggage you have of envy and comparison and hierarchy and all these things that kind of are these constant companions.
Sure.
They actually don't matter.
No.
And whether or not you are able to as fluently quote like, who the producer of like a Blue Note record, a particular record was, and all of that stuff. It's not as relevant as it might seem, And so I'm just trying to get to that place where I can be immune, to that kind of negativity.
Sure, and that kind of
it's tough.
It's because I think there's a nature within that style of mindset that's very what's the word? That there's something to prove.
Right.
And
that reminds me go ahead.
And so then with that idea, I have to think of like, okay, if someone has something to prove, then clearly you're very insecure. Okay, that's fine. Everybody's insecure. There's no judgment on being insecure. Everybody is whatever. Why do you think this is to the, person X who's insecure? What does it mean something to act as if you're not? And then how, more importantly, how is that going to impact your music? If you can't drop this really human quality within your music, let's take a look at that. So acting as if you know everything about everything all the time is killing the way you play. Yeah. Because you're automatically closed off to vulnerability. And there's no way. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they have this together where they can access the vulnerability only with the instrument and then shut it off and be an asshole.
There are people like that.
There are people like that, and that's cool if they can dip back and forth on it. I guess I don't know. If it was cool, I'd probably be into doing it. I don't value it, but I think that really being centered with the grit of yourself is important, and understanding your limitations and like, well, no, I'm just this guy, and I'm not trying to play. Now I've definitely done this, tried to sound exactly like my heroes, and I've failed miserably. For a multitude of reasons.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, but really just kind of accepting and allowing me as an individual to be.
Yeah, man, just loving yourself,
man,
like being
that's
like
such a part of it all. To stay sane as a musician and in the world, but
I'm just me, and
this is what it is. And I've studied, and everything's going to be.
There's only one me.
Yeah, everything's going to work out
I'm
okay,
ready.
right? Like I'm
prepared.
I'm not going to mess this up too bad. We'll be all right. But I don't sound like Jocko or Jamerson or Pino or like this is just here.
Yeah.
So that
I would love to sound like Pino if I could.
Man,
but
yeah, I know.
That reminds me of one of the things I'm up to now is it's been a long time coming, but Carrie Nordstrand, the bass builder and designer and
you were telling me about this
pickup designer. Yeah, we have this podcast and anyway, one of the that we're working on called What Makes Music, and one of the interviews we did that it was such a privilege was Larry Klein.
Sure.
And one of the things that stuck with me about Larry is at some point in that conversation, we talked for a couple hours. It was great. And I at some point asked him, because he's probably, more renowned now as a producer and a kind of assembler of musical situations as he is as just a bass player. But
Sure.
And we were talking about what it was that he looked for in people that he wanted to collaborate with or hire or work with. And he quickly had an answer, and it was, I will only work with people who have nothing left to prove.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, first of all, wow, what a luxury.
Yeah.
Because it's,
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because then
you
at that
call
point,
Herbie, and like Herbie will pick up and do the gig. That's pretty amazing.
Right.
But I think that gets at some really, really inherent truth, which is in order to get the best out of somebody, to get the purest source of expression, that might be a way at it, because that means that they're kind of channeling and manifesting the music without the added motivation to show off or to show up.
Right. They're not thinking about anything. I mean, I would assume that the mindset doesn't go anywhere except for what is the best right here, right now.
What's the musical choice that would best serve this song?
And maybe that's
it's hard to imagine
that they don't play.
Herbie doing exactly.
Exactly. But whatever it is, there's not this strong ego tied to it, unless the ego is I make the best musical decisions ever, so watch me not play.
But I mean, if you could, I'm sure you can reflect on like gigs you've done. Like I can certainly do this and like think about the times it just happens so much, like where you're feeling this voice is like, do that thing, like, wouldn't it be cool to do this thing? That
you hear an idea, like this happens a lot on like fills, like R&B fills. Like you hear an idea of a fill, but you don't hear what to say. I don't know. Does that happen to you?
Interesting. Yeah.
Like you hear like something should go there, and I want to fill this space, but I have nothing to talk about.
I'm not sure I can know how to say it yet. And you could spend a lot of time in that space and then realize, I mean, I've had gigs, and it's usually the ones that don't require my full attention.
Right. Same.
In order to pull them off.
My mind's wandering. So usually I get, because my mind's already wandering. I'm not like fully committed.
Yeah.
Musically.
And you realize like, I haven't been, it's like that same thing when you're on a road trip and you realize like you've zoned out for the last half hour and you can't remember. And like, I've had gigs where it's like 6 tunes in and you're like, oh my God, I'm not even here right now. You know what I mean? And it's like that. That's not a good space to be in. So whatever it is that allows you to be engaged. And I think one of the things that's a constant distraction is wanting to prove something, whether it's to another guys in the band or the audience or whatever. It's like you're trying to, and that's usually not a good source of listening.
No,
and reacting in real time.
It's such a struggle to stay engaged with that level of detail for a 3-set gig.
Yeah,
and like like if you get called for the gig, it's only 3 sets. Like, all right, cool. Send me the song list, whatever. But to really, truly stay emotionally and mentally engaged, it's exhausting. And what I found is like if I don't leave a gig completely exhausted, I messed up. Like, cause at some point, like there's a little bit of checkout.
Like, there's always going to be. I mean, that's natural. You're
not
a robot, for sure.
But I mean,
and sometimes the checkout thing is like an asset. I don't know how you feel. Like depends on the gig and the vibe and the music and the the style. But like sometimes the unconsciousness is a sort of like a way to achieve oneness.
Okay.
With the groove or with the like kind of losing oneself.
Sure.
So that and that can kind of take on the form of me not thinking. You want to be. You don't want to think, right? That's sort of always like a tenet. Is like the moment you thought you've lost and somehow like because you're planning and that's not really
right. And then there's a what did I just do? What's coming up before and all that.
Right. And so sometimes like kind of like I don't know, spacing out is. I mean, I'll do this thing where I'll look at, I don't know if you do this, like a spot in the room. Like realize I've been staring at this like light fixture in the corner for like 25 minutes. Like, and that'll be like, then I'll see someone after the gig, be like, why were you just staring at the corner? It's like, oh, I didn't know I was. Like, I didn't even realize. So I don't know. There's all these games we play with ourselves to.
Yeah. I don't know what that is. And then I wonder sometimes if like, the zone out thing is good, but then am I being mindful enough to create,
right? Then you miss the bridge,
right?
Or, whatever. That happens all the time. You sense like the weird energy next to you. Look over and someone's like waving their arms at you, and you,
right. Or the worst is the smirk from the drummer after. Which is like, I heard it. That's the worst. It's not a bad look. It's a like
you didn't get away with it.
Yeah, it's like you didn't get away with it. I'm not that mad, but I heard it. Yep. And I'm gonna let you know that I know.
Yep.
What's the name of the podcast? Shit. And when can we look for that to be out?
It's called What Makes Music. I think it'll be out within. I'm not sure when this will come out, but it'll. I would say early October, hopefully, if all goes as planned. Yeah, and there'll be, I think, about 5 out of the gate.
Nice.
Talk to a bunch of cool people that I think.
Are you just doing an initial 5 release, or are those being spaced out with any kind of how you will continue to release?
I think we'll do a couple to release, and then we'll space them out, and then in the meantime be generating new content.
Sure.
But yeah, it's not dissimilar, I think, to what you're doing. Although I think it's a little less. It's actually not dissimilar. But we're definitely not trying to make it bass focused necessarily.
Sure.
Although that is, again, those are the people we know the best. But yeah,
it's actually easier for me to get non-bass players.
Interesting.
Because bass players aren't on the gig, so I know.
I also don't know them quite as well. Sometimes
the non-bass players.
Well, no, the bass players, because like you said, like it's like Clark Kent and Superman, and
right.
Like you're never on the gig at the same time, so you don't hang as much. And
the bass players I know that have been on, either I don't know at all, or there's guys I'll run into every once in a while in LA because we've swapped gigs or play with a lot of the same people, but the other dudes I feel closer with and sometimes more comfortable with because. Dude, we've hung, we played music. I know that works out well, so there's already kind of a foundation set here.
Right.
Cool, man. Well, make sure to send me links to the podcast.
I'll send you links to that. I'll send you links to the studio, the other thing I'm up to. And
who's got the archives for some of those things you've written about in bass player? Does the new bass player still have all the archives?
I think the new bass player has them. A lot of them are available in various ways. Either just readers have scanned them and are hosting PDFs somewhere, or I can maybe a couple of the things that we've talked about here I can try to find and link to, like that Tube Amp story, my Dave Holland story, or whatever.
A couple things I'd like to read both of those actually.
People have a sense of some of the stuff I've done,
and then you're still working with the new magazine, and that.
I have a column every month called The Inquirer, which is truly just things I want to write about.
Cool.
And doing that and doing gigs, here in the Bay Area and occasionally in other places, and recording studio, trying to make records. And do
you ever take reader submissions for curiosity things?
For what do you mean? For,
like what
magazine?
Yeah, like there's actually, this just reminded me. I typically like to ask guys, but I usually forget to ask the guys, like of a gig story, a gnarly gig story. I was trying to make that like kind of a little segment in the podcast for a minute.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But then I would usually forget until the end. And so I'm trying to get the listeners to submit theirs as well. Like I want to hear about some.
Good idea.
Like just tell me about some like weird. One of the guys that I interviewed got punched in the back of the head on a break. And he told me that story. I thought that was hilarious.
That's weird. I've definitely got some.
What's one of yours?
Let's see. One that comes to mind as I was doing I was doing a party. It was like a private event party up here in some nice house in Marin, and it started kind of sort of classy, and then as like the liquor flowed, it started to kind of open up a bit, and it was fun, and it was kind of like a funky jam bandy kind of vibe. And we're out on this deck, and I notice some weird energy kind of brewing on the dance floor. You've been staring at these people all night. You know how it is, and you're just kind of like coming up.
Some of them are really entertaining.
Entertaining.
Yeah, and so you're kind of keeping your eye on like, all right, who's the drunk one because they're funny, and I'm just gonna kind of watch you all night.
You're trying to like come up with backstories in your mind.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it. So I've been doing that all night, and I noticed some kind of like tension brewing between these two guys. I'm like, this is not looking good, and they're starting to kind of like puff up their chests and kind of do that whole thing, and they're arguing, and this is like at a very Marin County is a really affluent part of the Bay Area, and it's a very kind of suburban white bread scene. So, and just to set the stage, and so they're starting to argue, and we're still playing. And they're about maybe they're like kind of in the front of the audience, and they're maybe about 10 feet away from us. And in the middle of this argument, one of the guys reaches behind his back and pulls a gun out of his waistband, and like points it straight at the guy. He's like, "What do you think now, mother?" Like that kind of thing.
But it wasn't. It was just seemed like a suburban.
Yeah, it wasn't like you might expect gunplay.
Right, there was no like inner city bar or anything.
No. This was not the stereotypically gun oriented demographic. And it was so weird because it was that thing where it takes a moment to react and you don't know what to do, and you're like, is this real? What's happening? It's surreal. You don't expect it. It's like this fish out of water. And so there's the band like playing still, and we're all variably recognizing what's going on. So like this tune just kind of like peters out, like this, until everyone's just kind of silent. And then someone came up and was like, "You got to get the fuck out of here, man!" And so he puts it away and runs out. And then we're all like shocked. And I remember the owner of the house who hired us like being like, "Come on, you guys have to play again," and like being like, "No." Like we, had getting this argument with them about like we're not really down for this. I might die. Shitty for $150.
Right. Who else has guns? Like can we all just leave the weapons at the door?
Right. Can we make this a weapon free?
Yeah.
So that's just one that sticks out. But there's many more. Many more. That's just what it is. That's one of the perks, man. You get to live on the edge.
Yeah. You end up seeing it all at some point, and then the weird thing is like you become so conditioned to it, like not guns being pulled. Yeah, it's just like all right.
Weird chaos is happening.
Yeah, but then I'd still get home after something funny or irregular, or kind of some weird bizarre gig story. I'd get home. Back when I was married, how was the gig? It was fine. Like, and you just compartmentalize it, like, that's just what this is. Whatever happened, the gig was fun.
And that's what's great about it. I mean, I love that part of it. The existential randomness, is just, especially when you're on the road, that kind of thing tends to be more amplified. But it's like just this like, wow, how did I get here? Or how am I seeing that? Like, there's only one way, and that's music. Like it brought me to this weird ass situation, or this incredible moment. I love that part.
Yeah. It's I'm more off to sum it all up. I'm glad I can't do anything else.
Yeah.
Like it's I'm stuck with this, and it's stuck with me, but I'm happy about it.
Good.
And it sounds like you are too, man, and it was great to hear your story. I look forward to hearing the podcast. That sounds like it's right up my alley.
I should hope so.
Yeah.
Yours and others.
Yeah, cool.
Right up all your alleys. Reminds me of another weird story.
Oh, do it. That's funny. Cool, man.
All right, man.
Thanks.
Cool. Thanks. This was fun.
Have enjoyed this episode and would like to know more about upcoming guests and other bass shed happenings, you can text the word SHED, S-H-E-D, to 66866. I try to make it easy. I try to make it easy as possible to stay connected. And let's be honest, we're all sending texts throughout the day, so just shoot me one. Shoot me one that says SHED, S-H-E-D, to 66866. And we'll get you plugged into the newsletter. You can also hear previous versions of the podcast at Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher. Please take a second to rate the show. And if you'd like, you can donate to keep this thing happening. There is a link for that at thebasshed.com/podcast. All right, that was the warmth and wisdom of Jonathan Herrera. I will be posting about the podcast, his podcast, with Carrie Norstrand when it comes out. So keep a lookout for that. And I got links to Bass Magazine at thebasshed.com and Jonathan's website as well. So there's all that fun stuff to check out. That's about all I got, folks. My name's Ryan, and I will catch you on the next one.